What would happen if our collective savings, yours, mine, your neighbours, only funded positive change? What difference would that make to the world? Hi, I'm Sarah LaBrecque, and this is the Purpose Pioneers from Positive News. In this podcast, I meet the leaders of some of the UK's most inspiring organisations to uncover how they're turning their ideals into action. In each episode, we'll explore 3 defining moments that reveal their journey of putting purpose into practice. The Purpose Pioneers is supported by Triodos Bank. Today, I have Mark Clayton joining me. Welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Hi, great to be here.
Hi. So Mark is the CEO of Triodos Bank UK, an ethical bank that works to create social, environmental, and cultural positive change. So, Mark, for the benefit of our listeners, can you give us a brief summary of Triodos Bank and what makes it different to other banks?
Yeah, I'd love to, Sarah, thank you. So, Triodos has been around in the UK now for 30 years, in Europe actually for slightly longer, and is truly mission-driven in its desire to deliver positive impact for both people and for planet, and to ensure that actually profit doesn't act as a way of compromising those ideals. So we are a bank ultimately that seeks to both finance change, but also to change finance. And within our lending specifically, we have different transition themes. So we have transition themes around resource, food, renewables and energy, society and well-being. And that's where we tend to focus a lot of our efforts, where we can either do social good or environmental good. But when we lend, Sarah, we make sure that when we're supporting one transition theme, we never do something that will impact or harm another. And that, I think, is what's truly sets Triodos apart from anybody else. There are other ethical banks out there who do wonderful work, but I don't believe I've seen it in the way that Triodos does it, such that there is no compromise across any of those particular transition themes. The other thing that I genuinely think sets us apart is we're also an activist bank. We're an active campaigner for change and for good. We have an independent economics unit based in our head office in the Netherlands that actively researches and designs opportunities for system change.
Mark, I want to hear a little bit about you, yourself, as a young person, and what led you to the position you're in today. So I wanted to start with that quintessential question. What did you want to be when you grew up?
I'm almost embarrassed to answer this question, Sarah, because so I'm going to say there was one part of me that wanted to be a professional footballer, but I was never tall enough. I was decent, but I was never going to be big enough. And I think that's obviously a dream of a lot of boys, and increasingly now also lots of girls nowadays, which is wonderful. When I was a teenager, I was a mad fisherman, really keen fisherman. And at that point, I was really keen to work for something like the National Rivers Authority. So I thought happiness for me would be studying waders in a river or a lake somewhere, looking after the environment. And I've always loved the outdoors. But the embarrassing bit is I was talking to my parents about this the other week, and they said to me, "No, Mark, you always wanted to be a bank manager." And I'm like, surely that's not even true. And apparently said, even when I was really young and people would say to me, like, "Mark, what are you going to do when you grow older?" Apparently I would say, "I'm going to be a bank manager." And my mum and dad would be like, "Where's that even come from? Like, we're sort of relatively working class, with sort of builders, miners, etc. in the family. Why does Mark want to become a bank manager?" And I honestly don't know where that came from at such a young age, and I don't even fully remember it. But apparently, that was what I used to say.
Well, it must be something deep within you that has always just resonated. That's really funny. So you joined HSBC Bank. So your boyhood dream eventually came true. You did join the banking industry. So I think you joined straight out of university, if I'm right, and spent a long time there, nearly 24 years. So what was your time like there?
Do you know what? For the most part, so I had a wonderful career there, and recognizing that big banks right now don't have, I don't think, the best reputation certainly from a sustainability perspective. And if you look at things like the collapse of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, funding of fossil fuels, all of those are very real issues, I think, for the bigger banking sector to face into. But most of the time, I did lots of different roles there. I worked and met with some wonderful people, and I can reflect on both things that I learned there or learned while I was in banking that got me to reflect on where I am today, both in a negative sense, but also in a positive sense. Some of the opportunities that I got at HSBC really kind of started to shape my purpose effectively in ways that I might not have imagined. Because I think when I first joined there, you're right, I was fresh out of university. I did a banking degree at university, fresh out of university on a graduate scheme, absolutely loving getting to work for the first time. It was really interesting. There was fascinating learning experiences, the opportunity to travel a little bit, particularly around the UK to start with, and then international later in my career. I think I've always said that I almost felt like I jumped on the hamster wheel a little bit. And I don't mean that in a sort of, greasy corporate pole sort of way, but perhaps just stepped into working life and, the desire to lead a sort of positive, good life and, earn a salary that would allow myself to do that was probably for a few years a bit of focus. And I think sort of if I fast forwarded a number of years to probably around 2010 time, there's a couple of things that happened. Actually, 2007, my first child was born, my son, and then my daughter was born in 2010. And sort of having children was a bit of a moment. I think probably for lots of people who recognise it, just gets you to think slightly differently about life in general. But one of the things I did as an example in 2010, I was able to join a program. And I guess the benefit of large organisations is they've got really deep pockets and therefore can fund some really interesting things. But this was a program in Indonesia where I joined a cohort of colleagues from all around the world. And we were sent out into a local community in Indonesia. We were supporting an agricultural cooperative who was struggling to compete against the big city that was, encroaching next door. And we were there effectively to try and design a business plan. And I share that in the sense that I can't with all my heart say today that I know whether our business plan was the most wonderful thing that, the cooperative ever seen. But it was one of those moments where I was able to do and see something really different that was almost beyond banking effectively.
So we ask our guests to share 3 defining moments that are centered around discovering your sense of purpose and putting it into practice. And so the first one we quiz our guests on is about a tipping point. Was there something that triggered a strong feeling to you that maybe you needed to make a change?
I was looking after what was called a Premier Corporate Account team, and we were talking about how we could give greater support to a lot of the businesses that were banking with us at the time. And from that came the notion of supporting customers, or not actually even our own customers, supporting society with financial wellbeing education. And that for me became a real moment for a number of reasons. So firstly, the principle very simply was that we could use all of our skills acquired over many years as individuals to effectively create education on different financial well-being topics and go and support across different businesses. So we were going into businesses to engage and educate their employees on financial well-being, and we would engage with the HR teams there to work out like what are the kind of topics that their particular employee set might most welcome. And it came not that far, obviously, after the financial crisis. So a lot of the thinking when I put the sort of business plans together was about how do we rebuild trust in banking at a time when trust, frankly, was at an all-time low. And actually, it's probably never been that high, in the finance sector generally. And so there was something about that model which was so different. It wasn't about going and selling the bank's products. It was about delivering education, rebuilding trust, taking the view that actually if we did a really good job as human beings and people valued it, they might want to talk to us about the services that we offered. But we also took the view that said, well, actually, if people go back to their own bank with that knowledge and do something with it, then that's a really powerful thing. So the principle and notion of it in itself was really interesting. The thing that was a bit of a takeoff moment for me was that in order to make it work, we needed the support from all sorts of colleagues across the branch network, because we had the potential to deliver hundreds, and eventually we delivered thousands of events over a 2 or 3 year period. And the thing that really blew me away about it was not just the sort of what we were trying to do, it's the way that people across the branch network corralled around it to be a part of it. So people wanted to give something back beyond their day job and beyond, sales and anything else that they might be doing on a day-to-day basis. And if I'm being really honest, it blew me away. The success of it and the way that people loved the concept and got behind it was probably my first real moment of them saying, actually, there's something that's truly beyond the day-to-day that what we can do in banking, and how can banks deliver something that's more wholesome, more, kind of richer for society through, in this case, through financial education. So that was a real moment that got me reflecting for the first time on what a better life or sort of more fulfilling career might look like.
And so then some time passed and you did eventually leave HSBC. Was there something that kind of sort of triggered that departure?
Yeah, there was. I mean, I have to say I was offered a wonderful opportunity to, at the time, join Unity Trust Bank, and because of the way that I'd thought and progressed, and even going back to some of my childhood experiences, it felt like an amazing sort of career shift to go into something that felt truly ethically based. There was, I guess, it was more reflections before that. To your point, I'd done 23 odd years there, and as I say, for the most part, I had a great experience. But I reflected on some of my experiences, actually more broadly, I think, about what I'd observed in the finance sector more generally over time, and what I often felt was, certainly as well when I connected with friends who worked for all sorts of different organisations, either the drive of short-termism or the disconnect I sometimes felt between what might happen in the boardroom and what customers and employees might be really thinking or wanting. And so there were a series of things. I mean, just a very simple example, it always struck me as really strange that the regulator had to bring in regulations a number of years before called treating customers fairly. And you sit and think, well, surely we should be treating customers fairly. That can't need to be regulated for. That's just a really strange notion. But the bottom line is something was not working in the finance sector that required that. And actually, around that time, Sarah, I remember receiving a letter from my then mortgage provider. It basically was saying, your fixed rate's about to expire, you're going to go on a variable rate, you don't need to take any action. And it's probably one of the only letters I've ever remembered receiving, because I knew that by taking no action, I was going to be on a much worse interest rate, paying much higher mortgage. And actually what the letter should have said was, Mark, you need to take action now. And so there was moments like that where I thought about the industry and I thought, like, there has to be a better way of treating people than this. But when I sort of look back at all of that, and as I sort of connected with people, I often wondered about or reflected about the extent of sometimes decisions being made to drive the share price. And are those decisions always the right decisions for customers? Are they right decisions for the people working in an organisation? And I think in the end, I sort of reached the conclusion that for many organisations, the shareholder overrides both the customer or the employee. And I'm sure there'll be lots of organisations that's true, but that's just how I felt, Sarah. And that it was at that time that I started to explore options, and Unity Trust came along. It just felt like a perfect stepping up moment because of all of those experiences that had built into a package of things, over many years. When I got the opportunity to join Unity, given what it stood for, it just felt like far good an opportunity to turn down.
The Purpose Pioneers is supported by Triodos Bank, which I happen to be a customer of. If you're new to them, they're definitely pioneers themselves, with some impressive accolades to their name. They were voted Best Ethical Financial Provider at the British Bank Awards for 4 years running and have achieved Which Eco Provider status for 3 years in a row. Basically, this means that they're top of the charts when it comes to sustainability, which is great news, as it means I know my money is funding projects and causes that I care about. Visit triodos.co.uk to find out more about the power of moving your money. What led to sort of going from Unity Trust Bank to Triodos? Was that quite natural?
It was naturally away, but it's more of a technical change. The natural bit for me, Sarah, was that I would have always seen, and many people would say, I think, if you look across the suite of ethical banks across the UK, Triodos has been the biggest brand from that perspective. It's got quite a big both retail and business side, very, very well established, and also a global thought leader. So to some extent, if you're in ethical banking, then Triodos is a wonderful place to get to. I can honestly say when I stepped through the door of Triodos for my first day, I think it was the 16th of January in 2024, I genuinely felt like I'd come home. I felt like in that first day that I was witnessing the best of humanity in one organisation. And that's still how I feel today. It makes me so proud to be able to lead the organisation because of its both mission, its values, but also the people within it that are trying to deliver those mission and values on a daily basis.
Sounds very fulfilling, but probably very busy. So can you tell us a little bit more about the sorts of projects and causes that Triodos funds and supports? What sort of a range are we talking here?
Yeah, and I covered it a little bit, but I'll put some more meat on the bones for the transition, different transition themes. On our food side, so actually food is quite broad because it covers both support, for example, to the transition to organic or better food quality and better food standards, animal welfare standards overall. We're also more recently moved into what we call nature capital. So this is the funding of nature-based solutions across sites in the UK where, without getting too technical, effectively, what we've observed over a number of years is it always felt like the environment is in competition with the economy. Developers would say it might get in the way, for example. There's always debate about where housing or property can be developed. And as the carbon credit market and biodiversity net gain credit markets have developed, what we've come to realise is there's a way of actually using nature as an asset for the UK so that effectively we can fund support to rebuild biodiversity as a critical part of our economy, and also recognising that no government or NGO today is big enough to spend the kind of money that's required to replenish the natural environment in the UK. The UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. So, we're funding projects that will lead to reduction in monoagriculture, the restoration of meadows, the restoration of peatland, the creation of forests and trees, for example. And we're really proud of the work we're doing there because a lot of the work we've been doing has really been pioneering in this space, and it's space that a lot of other banks will not occupy. We do work to support the resources and circular economy more generally. So, businesses who are looking to deliver to the highest possible ethical standards. I was with a customer of ours called Vitso just last Friday, who are one of the most sustainable furniture producers anywhere, delivering to the highest possible standard. And it's a really interesting model in terms of reuse, sustainability. We fund huge amounts in the energy sector. So this could be solar, it could be wind. Maybe an example of how our transition themes work. If we're looking to fund, for example, a solar project on land, we won't fund the project that takes out high quality agricultural land that should be used for food. Be very careful about the projects that we support.
Right.
But we also look to support where we can community-based energy projects as well, knowing that actually providing community support provides financial well-being to communities. It can get people out of fuel poverty. It can create local jobs. if I kind of come down the wheel, Sarah, we've got the societal theme, and a lot of what we do there is supporting sustainable housing and housing associations to put roofs over the heads of people that might otherwise not have a good roof over their head. And then lastly, we've got the wellbeing transition theme, and it covers all sorts of things. But a lot of what we're doing there at the moment is supporting the healthcare sector. So this could be supporting the provision of new bed spaces for elderly care. It could be some very specific care types, looking after people with particular physical injuries, brain trauma, all sorts of different medical support. But that forms a big part of our wellbeing theme, but not the only part of our wellbeing theme. But hopefully that gives you a flavour of the different types of things that we are doing that either support people directly and giving people an opportunity and supporting human dignity, or supporting the environment directly.
So Mark, we've arrived at your second defining moment with Triodos. So I'd like to ask you about a kind of unexpected or joyful moment that really made you realize the impact of the work that you're having. Is there something in particular that sticks out for you?
Maybe 3 very quick examples. So I know that you're talking to Stephanie from Chimpanzees as a part of a podcast series. And when I went to visit Stephanie in the business, and she was telling me about the experiments to set up chimpanzees that led to families seeing their child smile for the very first time or lift their head for the very first time. And in those moments, it completely gets you. And you think, this is why we're doing it. We're supporting people sometimes in ways that we can't understand. And it doesn't matter that those families don't know that we're in the background. We know that we're in the background making a difference. The first time I stood on the Monaco estate when one of our customers, Oxygen Conservation, for whom we're supporting from nature-based solutions perspective, standing in stunning countryside, but seeing how it's been transformed back to meadow, how the woodlands are being sort of enhanced and created with natural, native species. They're moments where you think, I'm so glad I'm stood here in this moment. And even last week, actually, I mentioned Vitsu that I went to see. They gave me as a gift a jar of strawberry jam, which you might think is quite an insignificant thing in the grand scheme of things. But it was part of the principle of they have a kitchen on site, and somebody offered them an entire lorry full of strawberries that were about to go off, and they were just going to landfill. And instead of letting them go to landfill, they took all of the strawberries, got rid of the bad ones, basically cooked the biggest batch of strawberry jam you could imagine, and then gave me a jar on as I was leaving last week. And so it was actually what it represented in terms of an ethos that was really special. So I get these moments all the time when I get to visit customers, which is wonderful.
So what about some of the challenges? You've not been in the role too long, so it's about 2 years, isn't it? But what's been kind of the most challenging in that time?
Yeah, so I've been with the bank for nearly 2 years, but I've only been in the role for 7 months, something like that. So, what's been most challenging? It's a really interesting question. I mean, the environment around us is really tough, and I think some of what's most challenging is kind of keeping the belief amongst your own teams that this is definitely still all worth it. If you think about, we're sort of living in a cultural moment, I would say. We've got the rise of populism and populist politics. Within that, there's a narrative absolutely about climate change denial or climate change fatigue. You have customers dealing with things like the tariffs from the government in the United States. We've got still businesses and even the bank in the UK, managing the fact that we're now in a post-Brexit world and we're a UK subsidiary of our European parent. So I think the broader environment creates challenges for us all the time, and it's really important that we continue to give belief to our co-workers that they understand from a hearts and minds perspective the legacy in the end that we will, that we believe that we will leave as a result of working for Triodos.
In terms of the scale that you want to achieve, does Triodos, I don't know if this is a difficult question to answer, but does Triodos want to be a mainstream bank? I suppose maybe in some senses you do, in some senses you don't.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I would love. I'd love for, in many ways, the perfect world is a world where Triodos in its current vein doesn't need to exist as a separate model because it's the model that everyone follows.
Mm-hmm.
And, banks have a choice, in my view, to either balance profits, people and planet, or they can choose to put profits before people and planet. And that's where we would challenge the finance sector more generally.
We ask our guests if there's a person, a place, or a thing that kind of represents the future that you would like to see. Sort of your third defining moment, if you will.
I remember being stood in my garden not so long ago thinking, what will this look like in 30 years? And will somebody have to rip out and start again because the climate will have changed so much that the plants I'm planted today won't be feasible in 30 years' time? And obviously, I desperately hope that that's not the case. I really would want to hand on to my garden to whoever is the next owner of my house who believes that I've created something worth keeping. But that really got me reflecting on, or gets me reflecting on the planet and where we're heading and the speed at which climate change is impacting us.
Mm-hmm.
But with that, as I say, that bit that says we can all try and do something now and really think about that. I guess the other bit as well is the bit that's then really close home is my children. So when I think about my legacy in my career, when I think about my legacy at whatever point I step away from Triodos, I really want in the end my children to believe that I was fighting for something that was better for the planet that they're going to live in long after I've gone, effectively. And that's really important to me. And so when I look at my children, I have a real hope that they will believe that their dad did his best effectively to make the planet they're on a better world by the time he hangs his boots up.
He did become a bank manager, but he did an amazing job.
It was not the most obvious route, but it definitely comes back to that point though, which is that banks can shape society by where they choose to lend and invest. They can have an enormous impact, and that is what Triodos is doing, and that I think is what I would hope for other generations of people who come into finance to be able to see that opportunity and see the change that's needed, both in the UK and across the world.
Thank you so much, Mark. This has been an absolute pleasure. So thank you for joining us on The Purpose Pioneers.
Oh, thank you.
And a very special thanks to Triodos Bank, our sponsor. We will see you next time.